Hello everyone, and welcome to DE Classified, a podcast showcasing the history of destroyer escorts. Each month, a member of the USS Slater's education crew will highlight a specific destroyer escort and share the stories of the sailors who served aboard these trim but deadly ships. I'm Shanna Schuster, the Visitor Engagement and Program Manager aboard USS Slater, and today, we're going to DE classify USS ULVERT M. Moore. USS ULVERT M. Moore DE 442 was a John C. Butler class destroyer escort. The ship was 306 feet long, 36 feet wide, and powered by two D Express boilers and two geared turbine engines capable of 12,000 horsepower with a top speed of 24 knots. She was built in Newark, New Jersey at the Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. The ship was armed with two 5-inch 38 caliber guns, four 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 10 20mm anti-aircraft guns, three 21-inch torpedo tubes, one Mark 10 Hedgehog projector, 8 Mark 6 depth charge projectors, or K-guns, 2 Mark 9 depth charge stern rolling racks, 186 enlisted sailors, and 14 officers. These small ships really were prepared for anything. As you've heard in past episodes, every destroyer escort is named in honor of a hero. Well, this ship's no different. ULVERT Matthew Moore was born on August 26, 1917, in Williamson, West Virginia. He enlisted in the Naval Reserves on October 15, 1940, in Washington, D.C., and served as a seaman second class until appointed an aviation cadet on January 14, 1941. After flight training in Jacksonville, Miami, and Norfolk, he was assigned to Torpedo Squadron 8 aboard the USS Hornet. Moore was the pilot of a Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bomber and took part in the pivotal Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942. Moore and the rest of the squadron attacked the Japanese aircraft carriers without fighter cover and in the face of withering anti-aircraft fire and heavy Japanese fighter opposition. Though all 15 planes within Squadron 8 were shot down, they succeeded in diverting Japanese forces and preventing further launches of Japanese carrier aircraft. These efforts were an essential contribution to the victory of the U.S. Navy in this battle. Moore was killed in this attack and was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously and shared in the Presidential Unit Citation awarded to the squadron for their actions during the Battle of Midway. Bravery of men like Moore crippled 3 enemy carriers that day, paving the way for victory that turned the tide in the Pacific. In honor of his sacrifice, USS ULVERT M. Moore was laid down on December 2, 1943. She was launched on March 7, 1944, sponsored by ULVERT's mother, Mrs. L. E. Moore. Less than 6 months later, the ship was commissioned on July 18th by Rear Admiral William L. Monroe, Commandant of the 3rd Naval District. Elmer Milton Fisher, a gunner's mate aboard the Moore, remarked,
"Destroyer escort sailors always took great pride in their ships. Ours maybe more so, as we felt that we were a little bit special, as our skipper was the president's son, Franklin Roosevelt Jr.
That's right. Our little ship, the ULVERT M. Moore, was placed under the command of Lieutenant Commander Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr., the son of the President of the United States. FDR Jr. was born 17 August 1914, the fifth of 6 children to FDR and Eleanor. Frank was born before his father was president, but Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He was 19 when his father took the Oval Office. He was educated at Harvard and the University of Virginia Law School. While at Harvard, he participated in Naval Reserve Officer Training, or ROTC, His family thought that he, out of the rest of his siblings, was most similar to his father in appearance, speaking voice, smile, and charisma. Frank was commissioned an ensign in the U.S. Navy Reserve on 11 June 1940. He was decorated for bravery during the Battle of Casablanca, served aboard the destroyer Mayrant, DD-402. In July 1943, the destroyer participated in the invasion of Sicily. While in Palermo, the ship was nearly hit by a bomb dropped by the German Luftwaffe. Though the ship did not take a direct hit, 5 crewmen were still killed and 6 other wounded. Official reports state that Frank put his life at risk by exposing himself to enemy fire and carrying a critically wounded sailor to safety. For his bravery, the Navy awarded him a Silver Star, and he received a Purple Heart for sustaining a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. He was soon promoted to lieutenant commander on March 1st, 1944, and was given command of his own ship, a destroyer escort, USS ULVERT M, DE-442. Having a famous leader can usually go one of 2 ways: swimmingly well or horribly disastrous. So let's hear from a crew of his crew members to hear what they thought of their famed skipper. Bill Powers was the chief gunner's mate.
Well, we got an eager beaver for captain on the Moore was Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. His father was president, but he didn't get any favors. He was very casual. It was military and casual. It wasn't no spit and polish. It was get the work done and take it easy. You only had to salute once a day.
Elmer Milton Fisher was a gunner's mate, 2nd class.
He's a great communicator, just like his father. Very capable officer. He had orders down to the radio shack that if anything should be, anything that could interest him to ever come over, even when he's asleep, he wanted to be awake because he wanted to volunteer for it. He picked his own executive officer. He was a Whitney from, they went to Harvard together. And he was also a very fine officer, Whitney. He had the ability to give commands and then always brought the ship around to the most advantageous position when we were being attacked by Kamikaze. He was a good seaman. Yeah.
Jack Blackburn was a radio man aboard the Moore.
Our skipper was Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. He was a great skipper. He got us through typhoon attacks, and he did a great job.
Ensign Alan Guard said,
And he's a very accomplished skipper. He certainly knew his business, and he had the highest respect from the crew.
So it seems like Frank was pretty well liked, and he was no slouch in the way of ship handling. According to Bill Powers, he knew when to ask for help as well.
We had a reserve, mostly 90% reserves on the Moore, and there were only a few of us with any experience, and at the time I had about 7 years experience. So the captain would come down into the chief's quarters directly to even have dinner with us to talk over any problems he had, because his officers were fresh out of college, and they were a great bunch of guys, but they just didn't have the experience.
But we all have our rough days. Elmer Fischel tells a story about when his gun sight wasn't sighted in properly and he was having a rough day.
I'll tell you one funny one. I was rather proficient with a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. My job was to explode the floating mines. And so conversely, there was one time we went into port, and the fire controlman overhauled the gun sight. And conversely, at that point, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with it. He was standing up on the bridge. I'll never forget it. He says, "Fisher," he says, "you're making a damn fool out of me today." But I thought it was funny.
It's a real problem when your job is to explode floating mines before they explode your ship and shipmates, and you just can't seem to hit them. The ship remained in Newark while she was outfitted until the 5th of August. Then she departed for shakedown. After completing their shakedown in Bermuda, Moore made her way to New York, where she escorted USS Shamrock Bay, CVE-84, an escort carrier, or jeep carrier, or mini carrier, whatever you want to call them. Shamrock Bay was on her way to Norfolk, and Moore made sure she arrived safely on the 18th of September, 1944. If you've been listening to this podcast regularly for the past 13 episodes, first of all, thank you. We truly do appreciate your support. You may or may not need this reminder, but for many of you who may be more casual listeners, let's just dive into what exactly a DE is supposed to do. Jack Blackburn was a radio man aboard the Moore.
Destroyer escort's primarily there to screen for carriers who are on anti-submarine duty or, chase the subs away. Chase the subs away and chase the Kamikaze away and stuff like that. Depth charges, we had hedgehogs, we had 2 5-inch guns. I'm not sure how many 20 millimeters and how many 40 millimeters. Pretty much armament for a little ship. It's only the length of a football field. I always say I think it was made to go in Great Lakes and not in the ocean.
Oh, right.
Because DEs were so small and not very heavy, they were tossed around like you wouldn't believe out on the open ocean. In fact, Bill Powers says that
they could roll a lot more than the big babies. We had an inclinometer on the bridge, and I think we went over about 60 degrees at one time, and we were just about saying our prayers that this was the end of the road, and she popped back again.
60 degrees? Imagine a ship out at sea and their mast is standing straight. It's pointing at the 12 on a clock. All of a sudden, a wave kicks your mast over 60 degrees to the 2, and it doesn't stop there. Instead of it standing straight back up, it overshoots the 12 and heads 60 degrees in the other direction to the 10. And all you can do is ride out the storm, 10 and 2 and 10 and 2 for hours. It's enough to make you wonder, and Jack Blackburn too.
Are we coming back up? From about New York to Norfolk, I think I traveled all by rail. I was sick as a dog. And I can still remember one particular chief bosun's mate was an old salt. He'd been in for 25 years, I think. And he just really enjoyed walking by all these new sailors eating a candy bar or something, sending this back to the rail. That was his idea of a joke.
All right, now back to the guns. Jack Blackburn was a radio man by day and...
But I was assigned to the stern 5-inch gun mount for the battle station. So I went on there, and the gun captain gave me some asbestos gloves. I looked about here, And he said, "You're our hot shellman." I said, "What's a hot shellman?" He said, "You load it, and you make sure it gets out of the mount after we fire." And I said, "Okay, I'm ready," because it comes out pretty hot.
Yeah.
And the first one that came out, I missed it a mile, and it bounced all over the gun mount and hit our gun captain. I still remember him, George Bokel, on the leg. And I think he was ready to throw me overboard. I said, "I guess I'm not a very good trainee." But that's where I ended up spending all the time, is in the 5-inch gun mount.
So DEs are built to escort bigger ships, protect them from submarine and airplane attacks, and we've got a lot of weapons to do just that. Before departing Norfolk, Moore joined USS Kendall C. Campbell, DE-443, and the two ships escorted 2 fleet oilers to Aruba, Dutch West Indies through the Panama Canal and north to San Diego, arriving on 22 October. These oilers, Toluga and Azulia, are very important to the U.S. Navy, as their job is to replenish other ships with fuel, food, ammunition, and other necessities while at sea. They could also deliver mail to other ships. The process of replenishing supplies while at sea is called underway replenishment, or UNREPs.
You probably heard of V-mail. That's what they had then, where the crew would write letters, and then they would be microfilmed. They could get, 1,000 letters down to a little package, and then they'd blow them up when they got back, and that was pretty much the way. And if we did come into a port that we were assigned for maintenance, our mail would be there.
Okay.
But a lot of times it had to be transferred from a larger, a carrier or cruiser. I don't think we came across any battleships. We might have, but they were able to get mail and move it over to our ship while you're at sea. Same way we get our ice cream.
Speaking of ice cream, have I got a sea story for you. Before the Moore and the Campbell left Norfolk, they were supposedly equipped with industrial-sized ice cream makers. These were pretty normal for large ships, but no destroyer escort had one. There simply wasn't enough space. But according to Richard Warner, the executive officer aboard the Campbell, both of these ships were gifted one from none other than President FDR. Warner was just reporting aboard his ship as the XO, and the captain said all he wanted was an ice cream machine, and he didn't care how he got it. Warner just happened to run into FDR Jr. at the officers' club that night. Frank put in a call to his father, and 2 machines were delivered and aboard the 2 ships before they left port. Now, I listened to 4 oral history interviews, read 3 books, and read countless other documents on the ULVERT M Moore in preparation for this podcast. There is no mention of an ice cream machine by the captain or any of the crew. Radio Man Blackburn said,
We used to love to pull up next to aircraft carrier or something, even because they're the only ones that had ice cream, and they could transfer it across on the lines.
Ensign Alan Guard went on,
We were plane guard for the carrier on flight operations from time to time, and every once in a while a pilot would go in and we'd have to go in and pick him up. And we picked up this one guy one day, and I remember his name. Why should I? I don't know. His name was Roy Chapin. We picked him up and got him back on the carrier via the breeches buoy. You see one of them on the ship here. And they sent us back 20 gallons of ice cream. That was a standard pay for picking up a pilot.
Now, why would these sailors remember getting ice cream delivered over 50 years later if they could just make their own every day? I don't know if the Moore never got the ice cream maker from Warner's story. I don't know if they had it and couldn't get enough materials to keep it producing ice cream, or if they were all sworn to secrecy and are very loyal to not tell us. If you know anything about an industrial ice cream makers aboard destroyer escorts during World War II, please let me know. I'm starting a full-blown investigation on this. Snacking aside, let's return to San Diego with the Moore. After their duty to San Diego was complete, the 2 destroyer escorts were sent to the Hawaiian Islands. They escorted battleship Colorado, BB-46, to Pearl Harbor, arriving on October 30th. While in Pearl, after refueling, ULVERT M. Moore was urgently ordered to join a hunter-killer group based around USS Corregor, CVE-58, which was searching for the Japanese submarine I-12. The sub sank American cargo ship John A. Johnson on October 30th, the same day the Moore arrived in Pearl. John A. Johnson is a cargo ship crammed from bow to stern, top to bottom, with 7,000 tons of military supplies. Even her deck was filled with trucks bound for the Pacific Theatre, Johnson carried a crew of 70, 41 from the Merchant Marine, 28 Navy armed guards, and 1 Army officer in charge of the cargo. Johnson made her way through the seas solo, with no escorts, and travels at an average speed of 9 knots. That's 10 miles an hour. You can go faster than that on your bicycle. Cargo ships are not glamorous ships. They are workhorses. Their jobs are so vital to America's stability to carry on the war effort, not just for America, but for all the Allied countries. Without these provisions, sailors, soldiers, Marines, and pilots are without materials they need to fulfill their duties. Just after 9 p.m. on October 29th, Johnson is a third of her way to Hawaii. She's running in total darkness and under radio silence. That's when a sailor's worst nightmare becomes a reality. The lookouts spot a wake that is not their own, and it's coming right towards them. They know it immediately and shout, "Torpedo to starboard." Before any other crew members can react, an explosion rocks the ship. It rips the trucks on deck from their moorings and sends them flying. Before they know it, another explosion blows from the back of the ship. They hear an order ring out, "Abandon ship," and everyone races to a lifeboat or jumps over the side into the pitch black water. The water itself is dark enough, but now it's covered with thick, black oil, making it difficult to swim through. Just then, when the crew may have felt some relief that they survived the explosion, their attacker, a Japanese submarine, rises out of the water and begins spraying the lifeboats, as well as the crew inside of them, with machine gun fire. Miraculously, of the 70 crew aboard Johnson, 60 make it back to shore. But it isn't hard to imagine the rage and frustration that comes from instances like this. ULVERT M. Moore and the rest of the hunter-killer group she has just joined are tasked with hunting down this submarine and sinking it. This group operated between Hawaii and the west coast of the U.S. until the 19th of November, when they returned to Pearl Harbor empty-handed. Can you imagine playing hide-and-seek in the middle of an ocean for 20 days and never finding your target? The crew remembers a great deal of frustration. After some repairs were made in Pearl, Moore was assigned to Task Group 12.4, escorting USS Tulagi bound for the Caroline Islands. They conducted anti-submarine patrols while en route. Gunner's mate Elmer Fisher remembers Christmas 1944 aboard the ship.
December 25th, 1944, Captain Roosevelt led the ship in prayers. He did a fine job. Food was great. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt sent Christmas trimmings for the mess hall.
On New Year's Day 1945, Moore was underway as part of the screen for 14 escort carriers in Task Group 77.4. This group would provide air support for the landing operations on Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines. On the 3rd, Japanese planes showed up, but they were apparently just on a reconnaissance mission, as they were careful to stay out of range of the ship's guns. Bill Powers, chief gunner's mate, tells us,
Well, general quarters was always tense for me because I was like a coach with a team in playing. I didn't actually shoot myself, but they were my people that were trained, and they were with my equipment they were using. An imminent danger area at daybreak, just before dawn and just before sunset, you'd go to general quarters automatically and stay there until the area looked pretty good. The radar swept the area, and there were no blips on the screen. And then, of course, you'd go to general quarters any time there was a report of enemy activity in the area. Well, in the imminent danger areas, you could count on, at the very least, twice a day. And then in the meantime, they had to do their work, stand their watches, and try to keep clean. I would say every day in action areas. The captain would put a stopwatch on and try to see if, when the first general quarters we went to, took about 30 minutes, and people wound up in the wrong gun stations and on the wrong decks. And after we've been at it for a little while, we could get to battle stations in under 5 minutes.
On January 4th, Moore went to general quarters twice in the morning, refueled, and then spent the afternoon using the Highline chair to deliver mail to the other ships in the task group. While she was leaving USS Minneapolis, CA-36, her lookouts spotted a Japanese plane trying to sneak into the flight patterns of the American planes trying to return to their ships. This kamikaze crashed into Omni Bay, CVE-79, just 1,000 yards from Moore's starboard bow.
Jeep carrier Omni Bay was right on our starboard quarter when it got hit by a kamikaze. We picked up some of the people from that.
Did you ever feel stress and pressure? And my answer to that was every time I went to general quarters. I think I had a lot of stress. I wasn't quite out in the open like the guys on the 20 millimeters and the 40 millimeters. I was inside the gun mount, and probably so stupid at that age to think that they can't get me. One Kamikaze pilot slipped through a screen and sunk the carrier. Omni Bay was the carrier. They lost 19 guys on that ship, and we picked up, I think, 4 survivors. When we picked up the survivors from the Omni Bay, I suddenly realized that, like they say, kids when they're teenagers think they're going to live forever. It's the first time the value of the human life came through to me. I was not a believer in those days and didn't have a great faith. But as I look back now, I think God was watching over me the whole time.
The explosion shook the escort carrier, and large fires broke out along her starboard side. Moore made her way to the scene at full speed and picked up 4 men, one of whom died before they got him aboard. All the rescued sailors suffered from burns and shock. Omni Bay continued to burn and eventually needed to be sunk by an American torpedo fired from the destroyer Burns, an hour and a half after the kamikaze hit. With planes in the area, Moore went to general quarters 4 times in preparation for battle on the 5th of January, 1945. At 5 p.m., she received reports of approaching enemy aircraft, and soon after, Japanese torpedo planes attacked the starboard side of the formation, giving Moore a few moments to prepare before 3 Oscar fighters approached from port. She opened fire from her 5-inch guns at 5,000 yards and her 40-millimeter guns from 3,000 yards. One plane burst into flames and disintegrated. They got one. Unfortunately, the other 2 Oscars were not stopped in time. One plane crashed into an Australian heavy cruiser, HMAS Australia, and the other into USS Stafford, DE-411, tearing a hole on her starboard side aft. This hole was between her aft engine room and fire room. It looked like the ship was going to be a complete loss as fire broke out. Moore closed in and took 54 crewmen and 3 officers aboard. USS Halligan, DE-584, pulled alongside the opposite side of Stafford and pulled additional crew off. Gunfire from Moore and Halligan splashed a Val dive bomber early on the 6th, and Moore's gunners splashed another Japanese plane on the 7th. Moore was under sporadic air attack until the 12th of January, during this part of the Linging Gulf invasion, after which she retired to Mindoro for fuel, ammunition, and supplies. Once again, Moore was called away to help search for a Japanese submarine, so she transferred the Stafford crew members off and made her way to Mindoro Island to join Task Unit 77.4. The group searched all night for the submarine who was surfaced when spotted by a plane, but no sub was ever found. The next day, January 31st, 1945, Moore was called off that search and onto another. While en route to join this group, Moore received a message from cruiser Boise, CL-47, that they spotted a surface sub 8 miles southeast of them. 2 destroyers, Bell and O'Bannon, left Boise to investigate. Bell closed to 4 miles, and the sub submerged. ULVERT M. Moore detected the sub at 2152, but briefly lost the contact. They regained it at 2210, and Moore fired her first hedgehog pattern 4 minutes later.
The advantage of the hedgehog over the depth charge was that the sonar men never lost contact, and by having the water riled up as you do with the explosions from the depth charges. Mm-hmm.
At 22:27, she fired another pattern, and 3 explosions rumbled up from below. Muffled and crunching noises followed. Remember, hedgehog projectiles only explode if they hit something hard, like a submarine hull or a poorly placed rock. With no real evidence of a sunk sub, Moore fired 2 more patterns of her hedgehogs at 23:02. They hit the water and dove. 12 seconds later, a sharp crack was heard, as well as a distinct and definite bubbling and hissing noises.
And the hedgehog was a rocket, 7.2 inches in diameter, and it laid out a pattern on the water. You could either fire out the pattern either to the port side or to the starboard. In our cases, we always fired them out to the port. Made a pass at the sub. We continued on making passes on the sub and scoring usually a hit every time. And on the 6th pass over the sub blew up underneath us.
Moore moved in closer to the target. She once again fired her hedgehogs. They plunged for 15 seconds, and then 3 explosions sent out concussions felt by the crew of the Moore and 3 other ships. 1 more explosion rose to the surface, and sailors reported a bluish light similar to burning gases. Alan Gard remembers.
Up around Luzon, we were called in one night to assist a destroyer who had caught a Japanese submarine on the surface, and we made several hedgehog attacks on the submarine. On the 7th attack, I can still see it, the whole surface of the ocean, below the surface rather, lit up with a greenish blue white light, and from the explosion of these hedgehogs projectiles hitting the submarine. After the war, we found out that it was the Japanese submarine RO-115, and had about 50 men on it, and that was that for them.
For 2 more hours, the ship searched to confirm the kill. Everyone topside could smell diesel. Soon they saw what looked like a life jacket, small boxes, pieces of deck planking, and a considerable amount of paper. Jack Blackburn says,
And we made 8 passes, and we never saw life jackets or clothes or anything like that come up, but there was a tremendous explosion and no more contact. So they gave us credit for a kill, and we'd take all the credit we could get.
As the official ship's World War II history was written on the 28th of September 1945, the author states, "The Moore had to leave the area immediately and obtained no concrete evidence in the nature of human flesh, etc. That action later received a D assessment, but there is no doubt in the minds of anyone present that a Japanese submarine was destroyed that night. Today, we know, and it is accepted, that she had sunk Japanese submarine RO-115.
And for that, we received the Presidential Unit citation from the Philippine government due to the fact that there was 2 Japanese generals aboard who were trying to get back to Japan, and so that was a feather in our hat. Yes, I was proud to see that submarine painted on the bridge.
Moore then retired to ULVERT and remained there from 6 to 8 February 1945. She then joined Task Unit 50.7.3 to provide anti-submarine protection for the carriers that would provide air support for the landings on Iwo Jima.
We had 78 days of continuous anti-sub duty where we never pulled in anywhere. The boilers never cooled down. And that was our probably biggest confrontation with Kamikaze pilots.
This was the start to the crew's most arduous period, steaming for 78 days to support this operation and the next one in Okinawa. Bill Powers remembers the struggle they had for food without replenishment.
When we could, the food was good, but by the time of a long cruise, like 78 days at Okinawa, we were down to eating stale bread with ketchup on it. We got ketchup in number 10 cans, and we had a euphemism called a red light sandwich. Ketchup on 2 pieces of stale bread. That's how bad it got.
It was during this operation that the whole fleet, the nation, and the world was hit with the loss of President Roosevelt.
I was on watch. On the 13th of April, actually, it was back in the States, it was still the 12th. And the Pacific became extremely calm. It was like the top of a billiard table. I never saw it like that before. I never saw it like that afterwards. That's when we received the news that the President Roosevelt's death.
This loss hit the crew of the Moore especially hard, as the president's son was their commanding officer. On the morning of 12 April 1945, Captain Roosevelt was shaken awake by his executive officer, Robert Whitney. "I must tell you that we have just been informed that your father, the president, died a few hours ago at Warm Springs, Georgia." After a couple of minutes, Whitney got up and left. FDR said, "I sat, stunned, I suppose 10 or 15 minutes, then put on my cap and walked slowly to the bridge and sat down in the captain's chair. I asked one of the signalmen to give me a cup of coffee and began to slowly pull my thoughts together. The rest of the day, crew members came to express their sympathy. Elmer Fisher remembers it well.
We expressed our condolences, yes, yeah. I got allergies, very bad.
ULVERT M. Moore returned to Guam on June 6th and made her way to ULVERT for major repairs. The only engineering casualty in their extremely long availability had been one bilge pump. By the 19th, the destroyer escort joined up with Task Force 30.8. Their mission was to provide logistic support for Admiral Bill Halsey's airstrikes against the Japanese home islands. On the 22nd of June, Lieutenant Commander Roosevelt took his leave. He was relieved by Lieutenant Commander Garrett Eddy. Moore operated with this group until the 24th of July, when she returned to Guam and joined a hunter-killer group operating on anti-submarine patrol northeast of Luzon. After victory in Europe, on May 8, 1945, Frank left the combat zone to attend the U.S. Naval War College's preparatory staff course as a member of the U.S. Navy Reserve in July of 1945. Upon his discharge from the Navy in January of 46, Frank resumed his law career and eventually entered politics. He served as a U.S. congressman and, like his father, ran for the governorship of New York.
Yeah, okay. He was instrumental in our first reunion in Washington, D.C., 1962. He gave us a VIP-conducted tour of the White House, as well as a cocktail party at the Hotel Washington, which was our reunion headquarters. He held a flunky job during the Kennedy administration. I think it was Assistant Secretary of Commerce or something. And his ambition was to be Secretary of Navy. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, he was disliked by Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense. And so that was that. I've often thought that Franklin would have been a better Secretary of Navy than McNamara was Secretary of Defense.
Unfortunately, the next captain was not up to Fisher's expectations.
The captain who replaced Roosevelt was entirely different.
How so?
Well, as a seaman, he probably didn't have the ability to command a motor whaleboat, not alone a destroyer escort.
On August 6th and 9th, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. ULVERT M. Moore was east of Taiwan at the time, where she was on duty until the 25th of August when she pulled into Leyte. She then screened for Task Force 32 en route to Tokyo Bay for the official surrender of Japan. Jack Blackburn was amazed.
Well, the most amazing gathering of ships that I saw was in Tokyo Bay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
As far as the eye could see, we had ships.
In the following months, Moore conducted anti-submarine and mine patrol duties around Japan. They escorted Japan-bound transports, unloading occupation forces, and destroyed floating mines with gunfire so they would not strike another vessel unexpectedly. Moore arrived in San Diego on 22 November 1945 and was decommissioned there on the 24th of May 1946 and placed into reserves. The ship got some well-earned rest and relaxation. That is, until the Korean War started in the summer of 1950. The Korean War gets overlooked in American history all too often. Korea had been controlled by the Japanese since the beginning of the 20th century. After World War II, it was up to the Soviets and the Americans to decide what should be done with it. We know from World War II history, the US and the Soviet Union were not agreeing on much, other than defeating Germany. Once they accomplished that, they had very few common interests. So in August 1945, we split Korea. Half would be run by the US and half by the Soviet Union. The war began on the 25th of June 1950, when 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean army poured across the 38th parallel, the border between Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north, and the pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south, backed by the US. This invasion was the first military action of the Cold War. The United States stood behind the Truman Doctrine, which stated that the US would do whatever it could to help stop the spread of communism. Aboard Slater, we give examples of this when the ship was being transferred to Greece. But the US military would also go to war on behalf of nations being threatened, like South Korea. US officials feared if these actions were not taken, it would lead to a massive war with the Soviet Union and China. Some feared it would lead to World War III. But neither of the leaders of Korea wanted to stay on their side of the border. Skirmishes were common, and nearly 10,000 Koreans were killed in battle before the war even started. In July 1953, the Korean War came to an end. Over 5 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives in what many in the US refer to as the Forgotten War, for the lack of attention it received compared to other wars. The Korean Peninsula is still divided today. USS ULVERT M. Moore was recommissioned in San Diego on the 27th of January 1951 and assigned to Courtron 9. After shakedown, round 2, she left San Diego for Taiwan on the 19th of April. You may be thinking, I thought the war was in Korea. Well, remember, it's believed that if one location falls to communism, the rest are sure to follow. So anywhere that communists are threatening to spread, the US will be there to put up a fight. 17 May to 10 June, Moore served on patrol duty off Taiwan to deter communist Chinese invasions against the nationalist Chinese that live in Taiwan. She conducted hunter-killer exercises as she made her way to Japan by the 16th of June. She left Japan 9 days later and headed for the west coast of Korea. Here she participated in screening, patrol duty, bombardment and covering operations, and minesweeping. In his war diary turned book, Virgil Column records on 14th of October, "Got word that we officially sank the sub on the west coast of Korea on July 28, 1951. It was the only one sunk in the Korean War so far. It was not published, it was to be kept hush-hush, because it was believed to be a Russian submarine. However, we tried to make it surface or identify itself and received no word, so pow! Right in the kisser." On August 16th, his diary goes on to say, "Got in close to the beach at Sanjin. Found mines all around the ship. Finally got out. Sounded GQ. Opened fire on the mines to sink them. USS Thompson lowered her whaleboat, sank the mines with small arms." By the 18th, he writes, "Shelled Wonsan by day and Sanjin by night." He goes on for days, stating that they shelled railroad lines all day and they were repaired by locals overnight, just in time to start the process all over again. On the 25th of August, she pulled into Sasebo, Japan for refit, and more importantly, liberty. In September, she continued her operations off the coast of Korea and proceeded towards Okinawa, conducting hunter-killer operations as she went. However, Typhoon Ruth prevented a successful journey, and Moore was forced to turn back to Korea, reassuming her duty. This typhoon impacted Japan October 13th to 15th. It killed 572 people and left 371 more unaccounted for. The storm damaged 221,000 homes, 9,500 ships, and 3.5 million bushels of rice. Peak wind gusts were 121 miles per hour, and over 25 inches of rain was recorded. On October 17th, Virgil writes, "While today was a sad day for all of us, we went close to shell the city, and an enemy gun opened fire on us. They had our range perfectly, hitting us in our after engine room, with others landing close by. One shell hit the after steering compartment. Fragments killed one sailor instantly. His name was Seaman Alan W. Kruger from Wisconsin. He was 19 years old. Wounded was Fred Priest and our executive officer, Mr. Bennett. Priest had 9 pieces of shrapnel in his back, and Bennett got a piece in his ankle. Both were recovering just fine. The crew's excellent damage control work repaired the damage to steering, and the ship returned to action in about an hour. The starboard depth charge roller was beyond repair while at sea. Virgil continued, "We went back and fired on the gun emplacement. Don't know if we got it or not. They didn't fire back." Moore continued conducting shore bombardment, serving on anti-submarine patrol, and destroying enemy floating mines until she departed Korean waters on the 6th of November, 1951, arriving in San Diego 20 days later. While in the States, she underwent an overhaul at the San Francisco Naval Shipyard. One of the turbines had some operating problems that required a whole section of the deck to be removed, while they repaired and replaced the low-pressure turbine. The ship's crew also trained in anti-submarine and air defense while in port. While the Moore was undergoing this overhaul, Ensign Robert Schwar, damage control officer, joined the crew. In his book, The Navy and Me, he writes about a hurricane that hit San Francisco. The ship had been refloated, meaning they were out of dry dock, but still tied up to the dock. Schwar says that he would much rather have been out at sea during a hurricane, as it's much safer because there's less chance of obtaining damage from rocks, docks, or hurting civilians. The ship was cold iron, meaning that there was no steam being generated by the ship, and therefore no power. They were hooked up to shore power, traveling through big cables to power lights and some equipment. They obviously couldn't leave the dock in this condition. Every ship that could raised power and set to sea. On the Moor, additional lines were run to strengthen the hold of the ship to her berth. Extra logs and bumpers were secured to the side of the ship to create a barrier when the ship rocked against the dock. As the storm rolled, the lines stretched and the bumpers were damaged. The lines were tripled on the number 2 line at 1:30 in the morning. At 5:40, the stern wire parted or snapped. It was a 1-inch diameter steel cable, and it was replaced with a doubled up 8-inch manila line. By 9 a.m., lines were snapping all over the place, and every time they were replaced, a seaman couldn't get them as tight as they were before, meaning the ship was slowly moving further and further away from the dock. Every time the Moor would roll away from the dock until the lines would jerk her to a sudden stop. She would roll back, crashing into the dock. This process would be repeated over and over and over again, taking her crew with her. Bob wrote, "As you can imagine, most men were seasick, including me. It was terribly depressing to be seasick while tied up to the dock." By 10:30, the crew gave up on taking power from shore and decided to attempt to get one boiler running so they could get away from the dock. And they succeeded. They rode out the rest of the storm while at sea just off the coast of San Francisco. The ship would carry dents in the port side from this day onward, never forgetting the experience. By April 15th, the repairs were finished. New crew members had made it aboard, drills, trainings, and trials had been completed, and the boilers and the engines were tested and running well. Ammunition had been loaded, and finally, the Moor was on her way once again out of San Francisco and heading south to San Diego for availability. Departing San Diego to Pearl Harbor on the 18th of October, 1952, she got underway for her second tour in Korea. Schweier recalls, "It is interesting that we left for Pearl with no one absent without leave. This meant that we had a good crew. No one decided not to go to war as planned." War was underway in the morning with other destroyer escorts, Sieverling, Hannah, and Wiseman, now known as Court Div 91, or Escort Division 91. We had drills every day and learned to work together as a group of ships. Every day or so, we would set our clocks back an hour as we moved further west. Court Div arrived at Pearl Harbor on Friday, October 24th. Schweier notes that he never got a 24th birthday, as Moore met the international dateline on 4 November and emerged on the 6th. At the same time, the crew had an entirely too close call with a floating mine, scarcely missing it and relying on Wiseman to destroy it. Just after 1 o'clock on November 11th, Moore passed through the anti-submarine nets and entered Yokosuka Harbor in Japan. Staying there for 5 days, the ship received fuel oil, fresh water, and ammunition. On the 16th, Moore left Japan for duty on the east coast of Korea. During this tour, Moore was assigned operations disrupting communist coastal rail traffic and interrupting enemy logistic movements. Damaging the railroads was a vital part of the Navy's operations in Korea. Almost all the supplies to the North Koreans came from China or USSR, and the Navy's job was to disrupt the flow of men and supplies south to the fighting front. Korea is filled with mountains, but few valleys. Korea had 2 railroads, one on the west coast and one on the east. The railroads run along the waterfront, and there are many tunnels cut from stone. Moore spent a lot of time trying to damage the railroad bed, and if possible, the trains themselves. Bob Schweier notes that local Koreans could repair the damage that they had done to the railroad beds overnight, like it never happened at all. The other duty the Navy had during this part of the war was enforcing the blockade. International law dictates that the blockading country must cruise the length of the affected area at least once every 4 days to be recognized. Schweier says that one American ship, sometimes the more, had to make a run almost to Vladivostok, Russia, and back down to Korea every 4 days. The water was rough and very cold. Schweier remembers having to chop ice off the bow of the ship to keep her seaworthy. Virgil Collum writes that it was very cold and they had up to 2 inches of snow covering the decks. They had to work the 40mm guns every hour to make sure they didn't freeze up. She continued this duty for 2 months before she went back to her roots, with a period of hunter-killer operations off Okinawa until the 9th of January, 1953. There's a tradition in the Navy for the first entry in the logbook of the new year to be a rhyme. A poem, if you will. But it still needs to communicate the official, vital information. Lieutenant Junior Grade Dan Francescon wrote the following. Anchored in berth number 175. Buckner Bay, Okinawa, not much of a dive. 60 fathoms on deck makes the anchor stay. In the hard sandy bottom, 10 fathoms away. 128 and 1/2, 074. 050 bare points ashore. Toggen light is the first. A right tangent is 2. The fuel pier is 3. All bearings are true. The plant is split. Condition is 3. Baker is set. That's as it should be. Rear Admiral Williamson, SOPA to you, is commander of Task Force 72. The Salisbury Sound, or AV-13, is where he embarked, but not likely to be. Ships present include, from our fleet Pacific, some big, some small, let's not be specific. From U.S. Fleet Pacific Reserve are several others all ready to serve. Also some harbor craft hither and yon, all doing their job, number 1 Ichiban. On the evening of January 1st, 1953, many of the DE sailors found themselves on the coveted circumstance of being granted liberty in Okinawa. As sailors do, they all returned to their ships drunken and not thinking straight, and according to Schweier, sailors from various ships started insulting each of the crews, stating which of the crews was worst in the task group. They even went as far as insulting each other's captains. Officers and shore patrol were able to break up the brawl before too many injuries occurred, but certainly a few of the men returned to their ships with broken noses and soaked from being pushed in the water. Schweier states, "It struck me how well the captain had welded the men together in a proud, well-functioning ship, and how the men recognized and supported him." In March 1953, Moore was shelling the Korean shore, and the shore was shelling back. The Koreans were using guns left by the Americans after World War II. They built caves and hid the guns inside of them, rolled them out to fire, and pulled them back inside the cave again. Bob states that their aim was not great, since they were moving and firing so quickly, but they were also never trained on the guns. Schweier was on the bridge, and he gave order to start firing the forward 5-inch gun. The shell landed in the water and exploded. He asked the crew to elevate the aim and fire again. The second shell landed somewhat farther from the shore, closer to the ship, and he ordered, "Aim up, not down." The sailor was confused and thought he had done that. He fired a third shell and it landed quite close to the ship. Schweier then explains the thoughts running through his head happened much more quickly than he could write them or I can speak them. Number 1. Something was very, very wrong with the firing. Number 2. Looking at the forward gun, he could see that the 5-inch gun was aimed high in the air. They were probably shelling some poor farmer's field several miles inland. Number 3. The North Koreans and the Moore crew had been firing in unison. He was seeing their shells land and not his own. The Koreans didn't know how to finely adjust the aiming of their gun, so they were just walking it closer to the ship. The last was so close, the next one could hit. Number 4. The next thing he knew, he was shouting, "Right full rudder! All ahead flank!" Flank speed is faster than full speed, for those of you who don't know. It was time to get the ship out of there before she took a hit again. It's important to remember that most of the crew didn't realize that the shells were coming that close, or that the ship was in more danger than it had been the last 2 years of constant shelling. The Moore just figuratively stepped on the gas and floored it. When this happens, the deck gives the feeling of falling away, and everyone is affected. The clerk's papers fly off his desk into the deck. The cook's potatoes roll off the counter. The sailor painting the bulkheads lunges for his paint can as it slides away to try to keep it from spilling. And everyone drinking piping hot coffee is suddenly balancing their cup to keep it off their pants. The ship escaped with no damage done, but this close call reminded everyone how close they could be to danger at any point. On March 30th, Moore was assigned Fish and Game Patrol. During this patrol, Moore was to patrol Japanese fishermen out of 200 miles of water around South Korea that was designated to be exclusively for Korean fishing only. Schweier says that the actual challenge was to get the Japanese before the Koreans did, so they didn't kill them. 40 years of oppressive rule can really generate a lot of hate. While on this boring patrol, as now Chief Engineering Officer Schweier refers to it, there was an explosion of a boiler. When Bob arrived to the hatch to the forward boiler room, sailors were standing around the hatch looking terrified and dead quiet. He states here that when true heroics happen during war, it's because their training kicks in, and they are doing the right thing, not going on instincts, but what they were trained to do. And he knew what he had to do. Live steam will burn your eyes, so Bob took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and started down the ladder. The metal handrails were too hot, so he decided to jump. He let go and landed on the deck's first level. It hadn't been damaged. He turned to his left, felt for the ladder, and jumped again. He ran forward to another ladder and jumped one more time. He took a risk in opening his eyes. He could just barely make out the location of the boiler through the steam and haze. There was oil all over the front of the boiler and on the opposite bulkhead. Everything that was clean paint a few minutes ago was now black and greasy. A boiler can fail from low water or high water. If it's low water, the crew was not doing their jobs well enough. The pipes have no water to carry away heat from the hot gases. If the heat is not carried away quickly, the metal pipes will soften and the boiler will explode. If they add more water now, it will cause the hot, soft metal to crystallize, weaken the steel, and the boiler would be lost. In low water, you do not add water. In high water, the explosion is usually caused by a structural failure. The metal would not have been overly hot, and water should be added to keep the metal cool and strong until the gases have gone up the stack and the boiler has cooled down. It is not often that the crew down in the boiler room will admit to a low water, I wasn't doing my job well situation. The chief petty officer that was in the boiler room when the explosion happened kept screaming, "Add water!" And Bob had to warn him, "If you're wrong, I'll follow you to the end of the earth and I'll kill you." The chief reaffirmed that he was watching and it's high water. Bob turned to a sailor and made the irreversible commitment based on the word of a man he didn't trust. Add water. It was the right call. The crew added water several times. No one had been hurt, and they called everyone's names to be sure. As things calmed down in the boiler room, and the crew had clear orders on how to proceed, Bob made his way up to the wardroom to speak with the captain. It was a sad meeting between the two men. The captain had promoted Bob over a more experienced man, and usually having a boiler blow up normally meant several years in a Navy prison for the chief engineer and an unsatisfactory discharge, especially if someone was hurt. For the captain, it meant the end of his career, and with no other real training for civilian life, the captain asked for the full story, but never criticized. He told me that the main job was to get the boiler fixed as quickly as possible, no matter what. Within 2 hours, things had cooled enough that the crew could get into the combustion chamber if they wore protective gear. Bob called in all the engineers, whether they were on duty or not. Within 5 hours, they had the boiler disassembled and the men were hauling soot out of the compartment and dumping it overboard. In the investigation, it was found that a 3-foot screwdriver was left inside a drum. The wooden handle had burned and parts of the screwdriver wedged themselves in the equipment, and it blew. The chief explained this to Bob, who simply replied that it was he who signed the engineering log. It was on him. Suddenly, it seemed like prison was very close in Bob's future. The crew began brainstorming on looking for parts to make repairs. Someone found a repair kit from World War II. They were not authorized to have it now. Someone just forgot to throw it away. Well, they had to give it a shot. The pressure held on the third test. They got out the boiler manual and found the procedure for boilers dying. They had to start up the fire, produce the steam gradually as to not overload the system too quickly. A little over 39 hours from the time that the boiler blew, they were now, again, at full battle readiness. Apparently, one does not simply repair a boiler at sea. This was a huge feat and an accomplishment for the engineering crew of the ULVERT M. The captain and Bob never heard a word about any punishment. Getting the boiler back in working operation saved both of their careers. Moore finished their second tour in the Korean War when they returned home to San Diego on the 6th of June, 1953. While in the States, the crew conducted local operations, including anti-submarine, air defense, and trainings. The Korean War officially ended in July. But with the nature of the Cold War, you never really know what hostilities were going to blow up overnight. So they departed again for the Far East on the 20th of May, 1954, their third tour. At least the crew drew some different assignments this time around. They primarily escorted fleet takers and ammunition ships. But they also did some marine landing exercise, a hunter-killer training operation, and conducted those tried-and-true anti-submarine exercises with Colombian, British, and Dutch naval units. She made it through 3 major typhoons, Grace, June, and Lorna. After these storms, she completed her tour, made for home via Midway and Pearl Harbor, and on the way, she encountered an intense storm that battered her for 10 days and produced very harsh seas. I'm sure those sailors were ready to kiss the ground when they finally tied up in San Diego. 3 tours down, 3 more to go. That's right. Moore would make 3 more Westpac tours into 1958. It would be all these missions that earned her the nickname the Galloping Ghost of the Korean Coast. During one of the tours, she participated in Operation Skyhook. This operation started as a means by which plastic balloons could be used to transmit or send instruments into the stratosphere to conduct research. By the mid-50s, the project had progressed to researching the sun. Instruments attached to the balloon were now a 12-inch telescope with a special light-sensitive pointing system and a closed-circuit television camera that was guided by scientists on the ground. This was the first balloon-borne telescope. It took more than 400 photos of sunspots, the best photos of the sun at that time. More than 300 shipboard launchings took place between 1949 and 59. USS ULVERT M. Moore, DE 442, was placed out of commission and into reserve on October 10, 1958, in Astoria, Oregon. She remained inactive until struck from the Navy list on the 1st of December, 1965. She was authorized for destruction as a target vessel on April 18, 1966, and sunk off the Californian coast on July 13th by aircraft from the USS Coral Sea. ULVERT M. Moore was awarded 5 battle stars for her World War II service and 3 more for Korea. If you're looking for even more information on destroyer escorts, or you want to hear the oral histories I've used today in their entirety, head to our website at ussslater.org. It's one of the most complete resources of destroyer escort information in existence and contains links to other DE-related websites. Thank you for listening to DE Classified. This podcast is brought to you by the Destroyer Escort Historical Museum aboard USS Slater. You can find a transcript of this episode, accompanying photos, and a bibliography at ussslater.org/DE-classified. I'm Shanna Schuster, and I hope you join us next month to DE Classify USS Atherton.